As we move through the crystallizing and prototyping phase of the U, we'd like to give you an example of a company that started as just an idea and moved through a number of different phases and used a lot of practices that we're using today to grow to become a pretty large business. We call it a small, large business, and really became an ethical apparel designer. So not just designing and creating clothing just to continue to consume and consume, but really thinking about where the clothing and where the product comes from, who's going to use it, and what the full life cycle of a garment could be. I personally am very excited to introduce the woman and the company that you're about to get to have an experience with. You'll see a dialogue that Eileen Fisher has with our Presencing Institute team. And it really get to hear from some of the company leaders or some of the leaders across the business who really use this kind of ecosystem awareness or ecosystem thinking to operate the business, to collaborate with each other, and to co-create by sensing into what's possible.
I was on a trip in Japan, and I became very fascinated with the kimono, the shape of the kimono. It's just simple and a simple aesthetic and a simple kind of design. I just wanted to bring that. I just felt like I resonated with that. And so I had been struggling with clothing, trying to be a professional woman designer, then I was doing interior design and graphic design. Getting dressed, I felt like I needed to present myself, as a designer. It seemed like a too complicated a task, I literally get sick when I would go shopping. So I really didn't like to shop. So I wanted to just make getting dressed simple. And so anyway, I remember that I'd been telling people I was starting to come up with this clothing idea. And I'd been telling people about it. And I was in a world of artists and people like that, designers. I lived in Tribeca at the time. And so I had a lot of friends like that sculptor. That was a sculptor friend of mine who took me to the boutique show. And so I was walking through the boutique show and I went, oh, I could see what I could do, how I could do this. I could just make my clothes and hang them up here and people would see them because I knew that I couldn't just design them and take them to stores or something like that. So it was an idea, it was a way I could put the concept out. After talking about it, people introduced me to different people who helped me make it real, helped me actually sew those garments. And I ended up going to the boutique show and selling a small group of things the first time, and then I had to figure out how to raise money. And in order to produce the orders, I was sitting with orders and I didn't have any money to buy the fabric. So I just did, it was sort of like one thing, and you do one thing and then it presents with something and then you have to figure out what to do with that. So all of a sudden I had 8 orders. It was not much, not a big deal, but I had to figure out how to buy the fabric, how to cut it, how to sew it, how to ship it. Even I didn't know how to really use UPS in a complicated way like that. So I had to work out all the kind of logistics of it all. So I remember going, the first time I figured that out was a small group of orders. Then the second time I went back to the next show and I ended up selling it was a lot, $40,000 worth of clothes. It was a big deal. People stood in line to write orders. And so I just remember going to the bank. I think, oh, great, now I'm in business. I can just go to the bank. I'm real, And the banks just said, well, how long have you been in business? And I was like, oh, how long have I been in business? I guess I have to go fill out those forms. I guess I'm not really in business yet. But I showed my orders. I thought that would be valid as collateral, And they said, you don't even know these are real orders. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, they would say, have you checked credit on the orders? Do you know if these stores are even in business? And I hadn't thought of that. So it was really like that, one step at a time. When someone would ask me a question, I go, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that. Let me think of what to do. So anyway, that's sort of the beginnings is that And then it really just kind of went from there. It was that kind of thing of one step at a time, talking to buyers, getting feedback. Did that work? Did people buy it? Who were those stores? Where were they ordering from? What did they like about it? And then just trying to figure that out and figure out what else to do and where to go. And we've been building the company, and it's been a long road, and it's been many kind of ups and downs, and many more ups than downs for the most part. But it's been this idea of sort of continuing to kind of go deeper with the original mission, which was just making these simple clothes. And then it became, how do we make these clothes? How do we work together? How do we create, this collaborative environment? How do we make a more sustainable business? How do we make a more sustainable clothing?
Now you have an opportunity to sit down with Amy Hall, who for many years served as the Vice President of Social Consciousness. Amy can share with us in this conversation a bit about sustainability and social consciousness and where we're going with regenerative business. Amy has been a key holder of pushing a lot of this work forward and really thinking about people and planet, how to address the climate crisis, how to address social issues, and how to really use business as a force for good.
So when Eileen Fisher, the company, was founded back in 1984, Eileen had a few very specific goals in mind. She wanted to create shapes that were timeless. She wanted to use only natural fibers. She was committed to easy care fabrics and also pieces that could be mixed and matched. So all of these are aspects of sustainability before sustainability was a thing, before anybody was really even thinking about it, certainly Eileen in that case. So she founded the company, and then over the next decade or so, I was hired, and we started to think about what was going on in the world. So we moved from a kind of Eileen Fisher Inc. focused way of being to listening and seeing what was going on out in the world, really focusing on what was going on in the apparel industry, which was different from our reality up to that point. And we were noticing that the apparel industry was being called to task for what was then referred to as sweatshop violations. So in today's lingo, that would just mean, ethical factory violations and human rights issues. So we realized, wow, that's going on. We should really look and see how that applies to our own company. And I was asked to take on that body of work. And there really were very few other companies who were doing that kind of work at the time. So we were really making it up as we went along. And I would have to say that the way I personally approached the work and the way the company approached the work was through a very intense period of listening and learning, and then bringing in ideas and thinking about which ones applied to us and how we could make them work for us. So we would see a few other companies who were beginning to adopt a code of conduct, for example, a supply chain code of conduct. Well, what kind of code of conduct would make sense for our factories and for our values? We saw other companies beginning to hire auditors, social auditors, and to compare factory behaviors against those codes of conduct. So again, we thought about what kinds of partners in the industry would make sense for us. And we began to build our practices and our policies accordingly. Soon after that, we began to think about the environmental impact of how our product was being made. So for a long time, we thought that this commitment to natural fibers was good enough. But it turns out it really wasn't good enough. And we were starting to learn again about what was going on in terms of agriculture and animal care and chemistry, things that we had not considered up to that point. And I say this because I think it's really important to recognize that at any given moment in time, we were doing what we thought was the best thing to do, given the kind of information we had at that time. Science changes, society's recognition of problems and solutions changes, our own values shift over time. And so we have really been in a state of constant adjustment for decades. So this moment of recognizing or beginning to recognize what our impacts were on the environment was another one of those adjustments that we made. So we started by creating a small collection of organic tops, really. And that we knew that that wasn't going to be enough. It wasn't going to be enough to kind of solve our entire impact, but it was a way for us to learn about what it takes to create organic product, and also how would our customer respond to it. I mean, we have to stay in business after all, for us to be able to do anything positive. So after that, we started to look at other kinds of applications of organic fiber in our product line. We also then started to look at the dyes and the finishes, because we recognized that growing the fiber was one thing, but what you do with it, it doesn't just come out of the ground and you turn it into clothing. There's a whole set of processes that it goes through. So again, we listened, we learned, we applied different principles, and continued to learn. It was a very iterative process. It continues to be so today. And throughout all this time, we were also continuing to experiment with our human rights work, try different things, see what worked, see how our suppliers responded, see how our customers responded, see what made a difference to the workers in our supply chain. Constant listen, try, pull back, change course as needed. And I would say that we approached our work that way for many years. And today, where we are is we are once again in a place of kind of reinventing ourselves. We went through a tough time during the pandemic. We are a smaller business in terms of the size of our company and the revenue size of our company. We don't have the same resources that we had, say, 5 or 6 years ago and prior to that. So we're revisiting what makes the most sense for us, given our size, given our resources, given what's going on in the world. And we find ourselves, again, listening, watching, reading, talking with others, with our peers in the industry to find out what everyone else is doing. And always with this idea of what are the main leverage points that we can press to have the biggest net positive impact on people and planet. It's always with that in mind. We recognize we can't do everything we want to do. Who can, really? And so what we have focused on in recent years, we continue always to prioritize organic and the most environmentally friendly chemistry as possible. But now we're looking even at the origins of the fibers and how those fibers were farmed. And the term that's generally used for that is regenerative agriculture. So we've been producing regeneratively grown wool products for a few years now, and we're now just shifting adding to that line, we're adding regeneratively grown cotton. And we feel like if we can really address how the fiber was sourced and produced, that we can have the biggest impact, the biggest net positive impact on the carbon problem that we have in this world, and therefore a whole host of environmental issues. And I say that, and I want to make it clear that our attention to human rights and a variety of other environmental issues continues. That is just sort of that's where a lot of energy is going, because it's the newest area of focus for us. Many of the other things that we've been doing in our factories, for example, has just become how we do our business, and we don't have to put so much energy into it. So, so we've turned our attention to regenerative agriculture, and we're rolling that into a bigger body of work, which is to examine and research and learn about what other companies and organizations and systems have done in this idea of regenerative design. So we're reading, we're listening, and now we're taking it all in and we're reconsidering what makes sense for us and how can we be an influence on the rest of the industry for greater net positive social and environmental impact.
Thank you so much for taking the time to go into this little sensing journey around the Eileen Fisher ecosystem. I hope that this supports your crystallizing and prototyping experience as you move through your own kind of ideating and manifesting of ideas into the world. Really, we need you. We know that in anything we do, you may have heard this a couple of times now, but anything we do, we know that we cannot do it alone. We need to continue to connect with each other. So I do hope that this serves as inspiration. We know that as you get inspired, you also may be activated. So I hope that you take this kind of activation and move it into your own ideas, your own projects, your own realities, and bring others with you along on the journey.